Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sentence Frames, Stems, and Starters. Oh my! Today, we'll be discussing how to increase productive language skills for English learners by giving them the tools to formulate complete sentences. My name is Tara Sowles, and I will be your hostess for today's session. I am here for you now and anytime you would like to collaborate, and I'll be providing my contact information at the conclusion of this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's begin with a self-reflection question. How often are you incorporating sentence stems or sentence frames into your classroom? Take a moment to answer this question on page 3 of your note-taking template. Well, hopefully this presentation will give you some new ideas for incorporating this strategy on a more regular basis or in different contexts or perhaps with more intentionality. So now let's talk about the why. As you can see, learning to communicate effectively is important for all of us. I think we can all agree on that. But providing learners with vocabulary lists, that will not achieve the goal. So one powerful tool then is sentence stems, frames, and starters. Let's listen for a moment about this teacher and her reasons for using sentence stems.
I like using them because it helps me incorporate writing into my class to where my students can access it, and just it gets them started with a project. It gets everyone's head down, pen to paper, and kind of allows them to focus on what the prompt is. And they're really effective for the English language learners because a beginner student can add a couple words, they can complete a thought, and an intermediate, advanced student can finish that sentence and add another sentence. So often they're receiving information. If you get them writing, they're really thinking about what they're doing. So using a sentence stem really allows the ESL students to access that critical thinking. So it just kind of helps students get started and gives them a framework.
All right, so keeping that in mind, we always want to keep our why in mind. Let's begin with the end in mind and identify our desired results. Oops. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the next slide. There we go. So let's identify our desired results. And what is our overarching goal? For example, if we want students to understand and communicate effectively using domain-specific vocabulary or the vocabulary that's related specifically to your content area, then the learners will need to hear that vocabulary in different contexts, right? From their teacher, from their peers. So the next part of that backwards design is how will we check for understanding? Learners will need to use the vocabulary in context, so either speaking or writing. In order to set them up for success, we need to provide them with the linguistic supports, such as sentence stems, until they no longer need them. Any student can use them, but English learners especially will benefit as they are learning English and content simultaneously. So then comes the final step, planning the learning experiences. We can model the language we want students to use so they hear the correct language structures and vocabulary. Then we move on to letting them practice using that vocabulary with the sentence frames or stems. And finally, they can practice verbalizing and hearing it with a peer multiple times before they're asked to write. And some students will rely on the sentence frames or sentence stems as scaffolds, where others will be able to write more independently. Either way, the students will have an opportunity to learn from the teacher, verbalize themselves, hear from their peers, and then practice independently. This also takes students through the gradual release of responsibility. I'm sure you've heard of I do, we do, you do, right? So that's the goal here, is to provide this sentence stems, frames, and then scaffold them, take them away as the students need them less and less, and see what they're able to do on their own. So I know I keep talking about sentence frames and stems and starters, and you may be wondering, what is the difference and why should we even care? Well, first and foremost, we should care if we want our students to speak like scholars, if we want our students to be marketable after they graduate, if we want them to graduate, then we should care. Sentence stems and frames are scaffolds as students learn the language and the content. And sometimes educators might use these terms interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. They have their own form and their own function, each one. So sentence frames are scaffolds that may fit the needs of English learners at the beginning level of English proficiency. However, these same frames can be given to ELs at higher levels of English proficiency to teach specific language structures, also to teach mortar words known as tier 2 words. Now, thinking about the other side, sentence stems are scaffolds for English learners, again, at any level. The difference is that the frame is closed ended and the stem is open ended. So by thinking of the end in mind, you can differentiate sentence stems or sentence frames to help English learners progress from whatever their current level, proficiency level is, to the goal of where they're going to be at the end of the year. So let's take a look at an example of this. Here is an example of both a sentence frame and a sentence stem from a biology course here in Coppell ISD. Can you tell which is which? The first one is the sentence frame, and the second one is the sentence stem. Do you see the words for the sentence frame are also given? What are the two options for the frame? Active or passive. So what makes the second part a sentence stem? It's open-ended, right? So we can kind of see the differences there. When this teacher gave a sentence frame, she also, if she has newcomers, gave the words that can go into that blank, which is going to help set up the students for success. And then we have a sentence stem on the second part of the question to help bring out some of the open-ended types of questioning that we can use to solicit more higher level thinking from our students. So as with everything, it should be in moderation, right? It's important not to misuse or overuse the sentence frames. Making the sentence stems or frames mandatory for all learners or using them too frequently can actually stunt their creativity and lead to parroting of phrases rather than deeper thought. So once learners are able to produce these structured responses on their own at the beginning level, then it's time to increase in complexity until sentence stems are no longer needed. Likewise, moving from sentence frames to sentence stems when seeking more open-ended responses is an appropriate action. So for our newcomers with very limited English, they may benefit from sentence frames where they only need to fill in like one or two words, and then those words are also provided in a word bank off to the side of the page, perhaps in the margins, similar to what we saw in the biology example on the slide before this one. And then next, we can take away that word bank and see how students perform without being given the words that go in the blanks. Success? Okay, then it's time to move on to sentence frames with more blanks or sentence stems with simple present tense verbs, right? So we're building up the complexity and not just in what we're modeling, but what we're expecting. And then finally, our more advanced ELs, those who are almost proficient but need that last little push. These students may have developed some coping skills at this point to compensate for a lack of English, especially our long-term ELs who have been in the program, in the ESL program for 6 or more years. These learners may come across as, fluent and speaking just like their peers, but they still need some supports. It just might look a little different. Students at this level should be challenged to respond verbally and in writing with complex sentence structures, using abstract vocabulary, and pushing them to use all the different verb tenses: past, present, future, complex, right? And this requires modeling still. Sentence stems are the perfect opportunity to even help our advanced ELs get their answer started in the most complex, perhaps even working with some abstract concepts. They'll still need that model for them to be successful. Okay, so let's take another look at an example here. This is an example from an English course here in Coppell ISD. The teacher gives students the sentence stems to respond to their reading. I want you to notice how complex some of these structures are. Let's look at the next to last example. It says, the evidence shows blank, which allows the reader to understand blank as the protagonist looks at life through another person's perspective. Pretty meaty, right? Consider what the learners are being asked to produce. It seems like they're being set up for success to answer some complex questions from higher level text. So even when we're in an AP class, we can still provide these supports, but it might look a little different depending on the rigor of what's happening in the classroom. Okay, and then here's another example. And this one is from an 8th grade math course here in Coppell ISD. I keep saying here in Coppell ISD because I want you all to know that none of these examples are Pinterest perfect. None of these examples are just something that, a teacher spent 10 hours on and took a picture and it's the best thing ever. This is stuff happening every day in our classrooms with our teachers, and it's very simple, right? It's very simple to implement. So here the teacher helps learners solve two-step equations by giving them sentence frames and breaking down each step, right? So even though the learners are working with numbers, as you can see, it was an equation, right? 4x plus 3 equals 0. Sometimes, in math, we think it's numbers. So numbers are universal. What do we need sentence stems? What do we need language for? But the truth is, it's required. It's required by law. Anytime you're teaching the TEKS in Texas, you have to have the ELPS alongside of it. And so this is another strategy to help, again, develop and scaffold that, and break down the steps in a multi-step equation. Even in math, we can use sentence stems. So the reasoning is there. And, whenever students are asked to solve an equation, it's always going to require some vocabulary in order to explain what they did to solve the problem. So this structure sets students up for success by providing them with the sentence frames to explain how they arrived at their answer. So now let's talk about when do we use them, right? When you may be wondering, like, when is the best time to incorporate this strategy? Because it can be a lot of planning that goes into it or just a little bit of planning. So really, you can use sentence stems at any point in the lesson to structure meaningful conversation. This could be on a discussion board, or perhaps when the students are asked to justify or explain their answer. Before introducing some new material, you might have students talking about their previous experiences or their prior knowledge related to that concept. There are a lot of different times when you can use sentence frames. Can you think of any more examples? Pause the video and take a moment to jot down these ideas here, or your own ideas on page 4 of your notes, and then we'll resume shortly. All right, welcome back. Now let's talk about practical application. Perhaps in the past you have been given a list of sentence stems such as this and tucked it away only to never pull it out again. Or if you do use it, you may have had trouble connecting it to the lesson that you're currently planning, right? Connecting that PD to the lesson. So sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to think about which stem should be used for which lesson and at what point, right? So there are many times when using sentence stems can help achieve high levels of thinking, right? At the most advanced levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And many of these same verbs can be found in the TEKS. So you see the boxes here that are the words that have been boxed out, such as predict, summarize, interpret, evaluate, analyze. Like all of these verbs that are in these headings here can help us to connect to the standards being taught because these same verbs are in the TEKS. So you can find similar sentence tables in your Sheltered Instruction in Texas book. So if you wouldn't mind grabbing that, if you haven't already gotten it out, it's a great book, a great read. Every teacher in Coppell ISD should have a copy of this book. And so if you wouldn't mind opening to pages 49, that's where it starts. And then you'll find the sentence frames and various thinking stems. They start on page 49, and they actually have them in English and in Spanish. So the English ones are done on page 52, and then the Spanish ones start on 53 through 56. So just look for these pages, open your book up to these pages, and pause the video and take a moment to highlight some of the verbs that you see. Okay, welcome back. So now that you've had a chance to kind of explore how the verbs are in the sentence stems, right? Let's look at these TEKS together and pick out some sentence stems that would work for these standards. So here are 4 different TEKS. Choose one of them, maybe based on what you teach, your subject area, your content area, and then look at the verbs that have and the key words that have been bolded here. Next, we're going to use pages 49 through 56 in our Sheltered Instruction in Texas book to select a sentence stem that would be appropriate for any part of the lesson where students are being asked to produce language, either speaking or writing. Did you find some sentence stems to go with your TEK? We can use sentence stems in both speaking and writing to help students develop their productive language skills. So let's look at this math TEK here from Algebra 1. It requires learners to compare and contrast association and causation in real-world problems. So now let me see. At the end of page 49, that last section that says compare, classify, and categorize, what are some sentence stems that I could use? What do you think? Perhaps an intermediate student could use the sentence stem, one distinction between association and causation is blank, right? While a beginner EL would probably benefit from a simpler stem, such as the difference between association and causation is blank. Right? So you notice how the categories are not just broken down by the skill or the verb that we're targeting, but they're also broken down by the proficiency level of your English learner. So really, you have the potential to differentiate not just for here's a sentence stem for all the ELs in my class, but here's a sentence stem for my beginner ELs. Here's a different, more complex sentence stem for my intermediate ELs. And here's a different, even more complex sentence stem for my advanced ELs, right? So we're pushing each student at their level to do their best and to grow from wherever they are. So I hope that you found that little activity helpful. Just remember, looking at those verbs in the stems and then in the categories for the stems, and then looking at the verbs in the teaks and seeing how those align can help you select the best type of sentence stem to use in your lesson. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to share with you, in addition to your sheltered instruction and Texas book, TEA has created an ELPS instructional tool. And this tool is full of different sentence stems and frames, and it was created to help educators in supporting EL's progression from simple to complex language skills and based on the language tenses. So again, remember, we're starting with the present tense and then bringing in the future and the past, and then bringing in those more complex tenses. So in supporting students' EL's progression from simple to complex, this document actually is a great resource to use. So on your, this link is included on page 5 of your note-taking guide. And if you scroll down to the table of contents on page 4, you will see the various headings that correspond with the verbs in the teaks. So at this time, if you would please pause the video and take a minute to explore this resource on your own and think about what sections you might look at again later. All right, welcome back. I hope you were able to find some interesting parts of this tool and bookmark them for later implementation. Now, I know this is the last activity that I'm going to leave you with today. I know we've covered a lot of strategies for virtual learning. And so for those of you who are thinking about your in-person learners and how to keep them engaged, this activity is a great way to incorporate writing and speaking with sentence stems, called the Sentence Stems Roundtable. So you would start with a list of sentence stems and give a copy to each student in the class, and then give students about 10 minutes to complete their sentences by writing them down using information that you have recently taught. So this would be at the conclusion of a lesson or the conclusion of a unit. And then students partner up and share their responses for a set amount of time. And then after that set amount of time, they rotate to a new partner and again share their responses. So take a minute to think about an upcoming lesson where you could use a sentence stems roundtable activity. And pause the video to record your answer on page 5 of your reflection sheet. All right, welcome back. I hope you had a chance to think about how you would implement the Sentence Stems Roundtable in an upcoming lesson. Now that we've reached the conclusion of our time together, please take a minute to reflect on your learning. What is one step you can take to #bump it up and incorporate this strategy on a more frequent basis or with greater intentionality? Pause the video and take a minute to reflect on page 6 of your notes. Well, thank you all again for your time and attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out in the future if you would like to partner together to support your English learners. I'm here for you now and in the future. As you can see on this slide, there's my email address, extension for my office phone, and then my Twitter handle. You can follow me at PD by TTT. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.